All right, good afternoon and welcome to the January 17th regular meeting of council, first one of the year. The city of Parksville recognizes the people of the Coast Salish nations and their traditional territory upon which we gather with gratitude. So earlier this month, the Parksville Fire Department launched the 2022 firefighter recruitment campaign. The department is looking for community-minded women and men to join their team of paid on-call firefighters. Classes begin with this spring with March 4th as the deadline for applications. We encourage those interested to learn more about the criteria and the commitment by visiting the department's website and then calling the Parksville Fire Department to chat with an officer or arrange a tour of the fire hall. Moving right along. Consent agenda. So we have 3 items. So I would like a motion to move all 3 at one time. Again, Councillor Patterson, second by Councillor Greer. Discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. Ms. Pazzani, are you there?
Hi, Mayor. Oh, I'm here.
Welcome. Please.
Thank you.
You have whatever it takes you here. 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll take a moment to share my screen, so just bear with me, please. All right, and are we just getting the thumbs up here that the slide's coming through for everybody and council there? Okay, I think we're good to go. So thank you very much for inviting me to present to you today. My name is Julie Pisani, and I'm the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Program Coordinator for the Regional District of Nanaimo. This is a regional program that serves all 4 member municipalities and 7 electoral areas within the region. Today, I'm presenting the results from a survey that was conducted in 2021 at the direction of the RDN board, who received the survey results in October and directed further that each municipal council receive a presentation on the survey results pertaining to that municipality in particular. So I'll start off with a bit of the background on this survey on freshwater perspectives across the region. The main objective of this research was to gain a better understanding of community perspectives, behaviors, and priorities concerning freshwater resources in the region. So this included questions that got to the heart of the importance of local freshwater issues, understanding the reasons for conserving water, determining water conservation and preservation habits, behaviors, and actions among residents, measuring awareness of local rain gardens, identifying barriers to outdoor water conservation, measuring awareness of the RDN's Drinking Water Watershed Protection Program, and awareness of drinking water sources and watersheds in general. Lastly, it was to obtain suggestions for things that the RDN can do to preserve and protect the local freshwater supply above and beyond what is currently being done. So the methodology, it was a mixed method survey that was conducted both by telephone and online means. It was conducted throughout the month of July last year, so between June 28th and August 2nd. And it was conducted by a professional market research firm, Ipsos. The methodology included random digit dialing by area with a focus on municipalities. And then it was accompanied by a randomized mail out with a postcard that included the survey URL by postal code. And this really focused on electoral areas, and 10,000 of these postcards were sent out with an invitation to participate online. Residents who received a phone call could also opt to complete the survey online instead. In total, 800 interviews or surveys, I should say, were completed by telephone, and 593 were completed online across the region. The aim here was to strike a balance across age, gender, location, and demographics. So here's a bit of a breakdown of the weighted sample characteristics, which really again sought to really reflect the demographics within the region. So for example, age 55 plus, over 52% of respondents fell into that category. Majority were homeowners. And again, by community, it was broken out as such on the right-hand side there. That does reflect the demographics of the population across our region. The average length of residency for folks who completed the survey was just over 22 years within the area. So now I'll get into the summary of results pertaining specifically to respondents from the city of Parksville. So 122 surveys were completed by residents of the city of Parksville out of the total 1,393 completed across the region. So getting right into the numbers here, I'll walk through some of the results. So in terms of awareness of drinking water source, 34% of respondents correctly identified that they get their drinking water from a municipal operated system. In addition, there was 26% that incorrectly identified that their water comes from an RDN operated system. So again, just sort of reflects that there might be a little bit of misunderstandings of who is the water provider and more room to make this clear to residents. 15% of respondents state that they didn't know where their drinking water came from. In terms of awareness of watershed, so that is the land area in which they live, not necessarily where the drinking water comes from, but what is the watershed in which you reside. 55% of residents identified that they live in the Englishman River watershed, and 25% cited French Creek. So this really reflects some of the highest watershed awareness levels across the region for Parksville residents. In terms of awareness of the existing RDN drinking water and watershed protection program, 43% of respondents from Parksville cited that they are aware of this program. Similarly, 43% reported that they had participated in at least one activity related to the program. So priority issues, the vast majority of Parksville respondents ranked all of the freshwater issues listed as important. This included the availability of water supply for long-term community needs, seasonal droughts and that effect on ecosystems, the restoration of streamside vegetation for protection of water quality, and access to freshwater recreation locations, all important issues. In terms of water conservation specifically, the top reason that City of Parksville residents conserve water is, quote, to be environmentally responsible, considering water needs for fish and aquatic ecosystems. And this was 98% of respondents. So this really shows a high ecological awareness and motivation from Parksville residents. Parksville respondents also had the highest rate of responding of all the areas surveyed, identifying that to save money on water and energy bills was another key motivator at 87% of respondents. However, interestingly, City of Parksville residents were also among the least likely within the region to report that they monitor their water usage on their water bill or water meter, at only 60% of respondents identifying that they did that. City of Parksville residents were among the most likely within the region to cite that a large lawn or large landscape area was the main barrier preventing them from conserving more water. In terms of water protection behaviors, only 5% of Parksville respondents identified that they have a rain garden on their property. And this was the lowest response rate for this across all areas. However, more, 15%, are aware of a rain garden on nearby public land. In terms of suggestions, the top suggestion, so 13% of respondents from the City of Parksville respondents, for one additional thing that the region could do to preserve and protect local freshwater is to manage growth and development. Most responded that they didn't know what more the RDN could do. That was at 38%. So overall findings. Generally, the findings of our survey point to really positive uptake of water conservation behaviors in the region, some awareness and participation in RDN drinking water and watershed protection activities, and really widespread care for freshwater issues. It identified that there is more work to be done to enhance public literacy on drinking water sources and home watersheds among residents. And there's really room to improve the uptake of certain water conservation behaviors that are already encouraged through our existing rebate programs, such as drip irrigation and soil improvements. There also exists an opportunity to expand the prevalence and knowledge of rain gardens as water protection tools, as well as increasing riparian planting among streamside landowners. So what are the next steps? This analysis will be used to help tailor the RDN's drinking water and watershed protection program implementation to really best suit the needs of and address the gaps present in various communities. This survey done in 2021 will be a benchmark against which follow-up surveys can be compared so that we can gauge change in progress over time. Our idea is that we will anticipate to conduct 2 more follow-up surveys within 5-year increments to gauge this progress. And that's the summary I have for you today. The final report is posted and available online at the hyperlink listed below. And I'm also happy to post this into the Zoom chat for council members to peruse at their convenience. Thank you very much, and open for any questions.
Thank you. Very interesting. Any questions for Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Your Worship. And through you, I'm just wondering, Julie, can you tell me, and pardon me if I should know this answer, are there any rebates or any help in putting in rain gardens for homeowners?
Thank you for your question. Through the mayor, we don't currently have a rebate program for rain gardens in particular. We do have rebate programs available for rainwater harvesting, so rainwater collection cisterns, as well as rebate programs for soil improvements on your property, as well as drip irrigation and efficient irrigation hardware. But currently, rain gardens are not part of the rebate scheme. That will be something that we can look into in future.
Any other questions? Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, and through your worship, thank you for your presentation today, Julie. It was really quite interesting. Further to what Councillor Wilson was asking about rebates and so forth, has there been any consideration from the RDN level to provide rebates to commercial or multifamily buildings and so forth? Actually, throughout the city of Parksville, we have quite a heavy load of new construction going on. Has a lot of flat roofs on top of it that has a lot of water that's in turn going to go down into the stormwater system. Is there any way that the RDN could perhaps increase any incentives, or are there any incentives possible to encourage those larger buildings and so forth to consider rainwater conservation or stormwater diversion? Is that in the works or anything further?
Thank you for your question, and through the mayor to you. Currently, the rebate programs that are available through the RDN are specifically for residential homeowners. So they're not currently available to commercial or industrial properties. However, that is something that can be reviewed. It would be, again, something that would require almost like an influx of additional funds to then kind of meet that additional audience's needs if that was deemed appropriate and a priority. A lot of the time with new builds, we're hoping that, and in general, the hope is that through the BC Building Code and through sort of the regulations that exist for new development, that a lot of these practices can be taken up in the process of new builds. Whereas the rebate programs that we have in place, a lot of the time is really focused at residential homeowners to retrofit their existing landscape or water conservation practices at their households based on what they have, from previous development, again, retrofitting and improving the efficiency for existing households. Thank you very much for the question, and that's something for both the council as well as RDN board and at the staff level for us to consider.
Any additional questions? Thank you very much for your presentation. Really appreciated it, and look forward to seeing you at the board table sometime soon.
Thank you very much.
Correspondence, we have a letter from the Parksville and, oh, sorry, I missed one item here, talking away. I need a mover and a seconder. Recommendation to receive the report. Councillor Wilson, seconded by Councillor O'Brien. All those in favor? Unanimous. Thank you. Correspondence, again, Parksville and his District Historical Society, their annual report. I need a mover and a seconder to receive. Councillor Wilson, seconded by Councillor Greer. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you.
Your worship, sorry.
Yes, go ahead, please.
If I may comment.
Yes,
it was a very detailed correspondence from the Parksville Historical Society, which I greatly appreciated. Thank you.
It was that, wasn't it? It was very well written. Thank you. Reports. This is the information from the November 17th AWS meeting regarding the AWS 2022 to 2026 financial plan for council approval. Al Wallace, the Director, AWS Management Board Chair, 2022 to 2026 Arrowsmith Water Service Plan. I need a mover and a seconder for the two recommendations. Moved by Councillor O'Brien, seconded by Councillor Wilson. Discussion? I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. Reports. Councillor O'Brien, please present the information regarding the ERWS 2022 to 2026.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to touch bases before we go through the recommendations, to give council a little bit of background on the recommendations as presented in today's council meeting. The ERWS management board met a few times anyways, near the end of last year anyways, to come up with basically spending packages and so forth to carry us on. And instead of just another financial report, what I want to do is highlight the fact that the ERWS staff, the City Parksville staff, operations staff, came up with a very well-written operation review package for the spending package for the entire ERWS. And just I won't bore you with all the details on it, but the thing is that they've come up with a very comprehensive preventative maintenance program, which is a matter of having parts on the shelf when they're needed. When in emergencies, of course, that always happens when nothing else is open and it's the worst possible time. So they have the critical infrastructure parts on the shelf if they need to do repair. They have a water supply resilience plan and water storage review also included in the spending pack, which was really well thought out and is going to allow us to study possible water storage options, what that may look like anyways to increase our water storage holding capacity for the City of Parksville and the ERWS program. And it was a lot of discussion on it, and our staff actually went over the top to make sure that they had done the proper research and came up with proper procedures and programs that we're going to look into it. So City of Parksville is not staying still. They're looking at this very, very closely, and we'll be coming forth with further reports in the next year. Also, a very much importance as presented by the RDN, Julia Pisani, anyways, regarding the freshwater. We also have a 5-year fish monitoring program, which is very important with the Englishman River and so forth. Julie touched on it as well, the importance of the ecology of that, we're stewards of this water system. We have to protect it and so forth. And so we have in place, and it is by agreement with the local DFO and authorities anyways, we do a fish monitoring program to make sure that the fish are not affected. In fact, it should be enhanced with this latest study monitoring program going through. So just a background to council that just suggesting that the staff have got things well in hand here, and the spending package reflects that, and the board passed it unanimously, I believe. Passed it unanimously anyways with total confidence in our staff running the ERWS. So just to give background to another financial document. Thank you.
I need a mover and a seconder for the recommendations. Councillor O'Brien, seconded by Councillor Wilson. Just any discussion? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Your Worship, and just through you, I just want to thank Councillor O'Brien for that update. Very informative. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the two recommendations? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. Mayor and Council, rise and report from the January 6th, 2022 meeting. Mayor and Council rise and report regarding the court's decision on Beal versus Parksville City 2021 BCS 2501 petition. I need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. Moved by Councillor Fraz, seconded by Councillor Greer. Discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. Mr. Russell, I'm assuming you're here on camera somewhere. Please present us with your information regarding the design panel status. Thank you.
Certainly, if I may, Your Worship and Council. Basically, our panel is made up of members. There's certain terms of the current design panel terms of reference that where a panelist has missed more than 3 meetings, they're automatically with the exception of an illness, they're no longer a member of the panel. As such, 2 of our panel members are no longer panelists, resulting in there being 4 members on the panel. In order for the panel to continue for the remainder of its term, the terms of reference will need to be amended to alter it so that the panel can consist of 3 members and still be an active panel rather than the 5, as is currently in the terms of reference. There are 4 options for council consideration. Staff is recommending option 2, that the term of reference be amended so that the panel shall be comprised of not less than 3 members rather than the current wording of 5.
I need a mover and a seconder for the recommendations. Councillor Wilson, seconded by Councillor Patterson. Discussion. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was going to move that we accept option 2.
I believe that's what we're talking about, accepting as option 2, am I not? Did I miss something? Okay, fair enough. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to our Director of Planning. Will there be an advertisement out for future members of the advisory design panel?
If I may, Worship, through to Councillor Patterson, the recommendation is that we proceed with the current members. At the end of this term, which would be December 2021, we would then be advertising for new members. But the recommendation per the agenda is just to proceed with the current membership. Part of the rationale is that to facilitate additional members will take us probably about 2 or 3 months to actually do the advertisements, bring a list to council, and then appoint them, as well as do orientation. So for that reason, we've just recommended to proceed with the 4 members remaining.
Any other discussion? Okay, so we're going with the idea of just reducing the numbers required down to 3 from the standard 5. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. Mr. Bowen. You have a report regarding the Investing Canada Infrastructure Program, Green Infrastructure. Please.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. And thank you for the opportunity to introduce this report to you today. Purpose of this report is to seek council's approval of staff submitting a grant application to the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program for stormwater improvement projects in the Parksville Community Park. These are projects identified in the plan that was adopted last month. Recommendations are as per the report, and I'm happy to answer any questions if I'm able to.
Do we have any questions directly for the delegation? Councillor Greer and Councillor Patterson. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Your Worship. I read this full report the best I could, and it's my understanding that the 1.916 million is our responsibility. What is the total if that's our responsibility? I understand government's giving us a grant of 70%.
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor, that is correct. That's our responsibility over the 5 years, the 1.9.
So what is the total then? If they're looking at
Again,
70%.
Through Your Worship, the total amount of the work is about 7 million. So about 5.2 million would be grant funding, and the 1.9 would be our portion.
Yeah. This seems like a big obligation for us over 5 years, almost $2 million. And I'm wondering, is this more about the environment or the green initiative, or what's the end result of this going to be for Parksville? I mean, to spend $2 million, we should have something substantial.
Through you, your worship again. It's really just completing a bunch of projects listed in the stormwater management master plan for the park. Initially, the plan has them phased over 20 years. We just brought an aggressive timeline here of 5 years because this grant funding opportunity is available, but it doesn't have to take place over a compressed timeframe.
Yeah. Because I believe this would represent probably 15% tax hike over 5 years, plus the additional work. So anyways, I'll see what everyone else has to say about this. Thanks.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is a tight timeline, as I think the grant application has to be in by January 22nd, I believe. Is it all ready to go through the mayor to the director?
Through your worship to Councillor Patterson. No, we haven't worked on the grant yet because we first need to determine if there's an appetite to do that. So that's why I'm here.
Follow up, Your Worship?
Please.
Thank you. And I'm not sure if you could answer this, so maybe around council table or such. In our budget deliberations, we do have some funds going towards the stormwater in the community park, and do have some projects on future going forward in the next 5-year plan. How would this grant application, you're just saying that we would speed up over a 20-year plan into the 5-year type plan if we were to receive the grant? Would that be correct?
Through your worship again. That's correct. It's taking a 20-year timeline, compressing it into 5. So it's a fairly aggressive amount of work.
Any further questions for the delegation? Councillor, oh, I'm sorry, Councillor O'Brien. Apologize.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through to Mr. Bowman. Thanks for your report here. And just clarification for Councillor Patterson, it was January 26th is when the intake has to be taking place for the grant. I just found it here too. So what I'm getting here from this is that by applying for the grant now, it's going to give us stabilized, guaranteed funding if we're approved. Anyways, that would carry us through for, as you say, a very aggressive stormwater. I don't want to say resilience, that's used too much. Stormwater correction down in the park. I read through the plan and it's very comprehensive, and it identified many faults that is just through no one's fault. It's just the way it happens. But the thing is that it's I think the proposal is to apply for that grant now, get it approved, and then we can know how far we can compress it, whether we can compress that into 5 years. As I understood from the grant application, it said that the government, the federal government initiative anyways, prefers a phased approach regardless. And so they're not going to come up, I think you said like 7.5 million or something. They're not going to come up with all 7.5 million. They'd rather do it on an annual basis, broken down, divided by 5. So the thing is that makes sense for the feds as well as us. So I understand you're compiling it all into like an abbreviated form, and I also understand there is some urgency that which you have identified as priorities that must be looked after to prevent further flooding and possible erosion of the park, which is happening with all this excess water that we seem to be receiving lately. So I understand and I fully support what you've done, and I think it's commendable that we're actually taking aggressive action to prevent problems from happening before that goes through. So thanks for that, Mr. Bowman.
Any first time? Councillor Patterson. Did you have your hand up?
Thank you, Your Worship. I sort of had my hand up, but
Sort of had your
Sort of
hand up?
had my hand up.
Okay, I sort of.
But I
addressed
think
you.
Councillor O'Brien just mentioned it was what I was concerned about is because we are in a whole different environment right now with our rainfall. So I can see now the point in moving this forward more quickly. So that was all I wanted to mention. Thank you.
Thank you. Remember, we're directing questions to the delegation for what their presentation was. So Councillor Fraz, then Councillor Patterson, and then we'll bring up the recommendations.
Thank you, through our mayor. The question is recognizing that if we are going to be compressing this time frame down, there's a lot of other things in the 5-year plan that would have to take a back seat to it. So what kind of considerations and what projects would have to be rejigged or pushed along or given up to accommodate this new work plan?
Through your worship to Councillor Fraz, that's a good question and we don't know at this point. Ideally, if we apply for this grant this year, we probably won't even hear till 2022. So I think that's next year's problem. But there will have to be some rejigging or additional staff. This type of work could handle a staff person full-time for the 5 years. It's that kind of commitment.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. In regards to the grant application, did the federal government say how much it is in the funding and when it would be announced?
Through your worship, I'm not sure how much is in that funding pool. Actually, sorry, I'm not prepared for that question.
Thank you. Councillor Greer.
Yep. Are we talking some of this money being spent on the actual seawall?
Through your worship, I'm just looking to some of the projects. Forgive me 1 second here.
I couldn't decipher whether it had something, because I've been here 50 years and I've never seen flooding as what's described in this report as bad as is suggested.
Again, through your worship, no, there's nothing in here related to the seawall itself.
And yet the seawall is where all the erosion is happening. Right?
Yeah, that's, I guess, a different issue as opposed to the rainwater in the park.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I have a hard time figuring out where all this rainwater is coming from. I go down at the park all the time and I've never seen a huge problem. I mean, the park's been there for 100 years and it'll be there for another 100 years. So I'm just questioning the amount of money that we're spending to do what, really?
I think I think that's part of the debate that we can have as soon as we bring up the recommendations. Okay. I would think that would be the best way to handle that. Councillor O'Brien, I see your
Okay.
hand anxiously going up.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through to Mr. Boven. From the original stormwater plan, there was mention to Councillor Greer's question, there was mention anyways, redirecting and lessening the effect of the stormwater going to the ocean. So there's a number of points where the stormwater actually goes to the ocean. Councillor Greer, you're talking about the seawall. The seawall to prevent the erosion. That seawall was to prevent erosion coming from the northwestern winds like we had 2 weeks ago. But part of this plan will help the amount of stormwater that's actually being introduced to the ocean that causes the erosion at those outlet points. You know where they are along the beach. And so what it stops the breakdown of the beach itself. And so it's to answer your question, some of that stormwater will be redirected away from that if this plan goes through. So it will help, not fix out the whole thing. I know what you're talking about, but it will partly alleviate part of that from the report, from what they said. Thank you.
Councillor France.
Thank you. Through our mayor. Next question is that if we applied for this grant and we were not successful, what would the plan then be? What position would we be in?
20 years.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, staff would look at the plan and then just incrementally over 20 years, try to follow the plan as best as possible, pull projects forward and budget for them at, I would assume 100% taxation. unless there's other grant opportunities.
So just to follow up with what you're proposing here then, is that we make this application, if we get the approval from the federal government, which would be probably sometime in the latter part of this year into the early 2023 would be when we'd be looking at it. So we'd start looking at doing the construction and whatever else in the first phase in that particular year. What if at that particular point in time, we decided that, you know what, this is far too aggressive for our financial situation? Can there's nothing that commits us to taking the grant at that point in time until we start to draw down on it. Would that be a correct assumption?
That's correct, Your Worship.
So the monies we would just continue to go on for the next 20 years as we are now. If the next council decides that they don't want to pursue this any further than what it is. I think right now, all we're doing is making a decision as to whether or not we want to apply for this grant. So I think that's a very important aspect that we're looking at. We're not debating any of this. This is all stuff that, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm directing this as a question. Okay. This is all things that have been discussed and beat up over the last many years that developed into our stormwater management plan. We now have that plan in place, and it is now spread over a 20-year period. And all you're saying is that we have the opportunity, if council so desires, to apply for this grant. And if that's the case, then we would end up with $1.9 million at $383,000 a year for the next 5 years after that's approved. Am I pretty close to what this is all about?
That's correct, Your Worship.
Okay. Having said all of that, why don't we just make the recommendations and then we can have the debate on it. I need somebody to recommend 1, 2, and 3. Councillor Wilson's and seconded by Councillor O'Brien. Now we can have the discussion as to whether we think it's a good one or not. Councillor Greer, I knew you were going to put your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I don't know whether you said it the way you meant it, but the 383,000 and other dollars amounts to almost 2 million, which is our responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
So the grant has got nothing to do with that money.
Well, it does in the fact that, sorry to just to answer your question, the $383,000, the $1.916 million in total over the 5 years is our share of the overall budget of $7.2 million dollars. So yes, it does have something to do with both.
That's our responsibility, which is a huge tax increase if you look at it. I mean, $2 million, you're looking at over 5 years, or 383,000 over 5 years, you're looking at a total probably of well over 15%. Plus, as been mentioned, it's going to take one person full-time to look after this project. Is that an additional person that we have to hire?
I see that we have a hand up from the CAO, and she's not going to be breathing on us, so we could have that conversation. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Maybe we do have our Director of Finance on the call, because I think when we apply for grants, we do have to reflect them in the budget. So not to say that council couldn't change the budget in the future to take them out, but if you recall with some of our other grants for the community park, we have to add the money into the budget as an expense, and then the grant comes off as the other part of the revenue. So maybe, I guess, 2 things, council could look at this in conjunction with other budgeted projects as we head into the budget process, if they wish to approve us applying. And then if we're not successful, we're going to have to relook at the budget anyway. So what I would suggest is that the engineering staff would have to look at how it fits in with the overall staff capacity, priority of other capital projects. And if it's approved, some of those projects will have to get replaced or moved out so that staff could actually achieve the projects that are covered by this grant. And maybe your worship, if I may just sort of ask our director of finance, I'm pretty sure that's how we have to reflect it, but if I'm wrong, perhaps she could correct me.
I agree, Kiva. I think it would need to be reflected in the budget if we proceed at this time, to be changed in the future, but it would need to be incorporated and weighed against everything else in terms of balancing this 5-year financial plan going forward, even if we don't know yet. Most of the grant applications require that it be reflected.
Thank you. Follow up?
Yeah, thank you, Worship. So what we're voting on is just the grant. We're just applying for the grant at this particular stage. Is that right?
We apply for the grant. It is-
We're going to approve applying for the grant.
Just so we're clear, the way I understand it from the CAO is that if we apply for the grant, then it's going to show up in the budget. And if it shows up in the budget, it has to be accounted for. Well, we can talk about that in a second, but so the answer is yes, we're applying for the grant, but we're also would be saying that it has to go in the budget.
Thank you.
Okay. CAO Kaler, please.
Yes, if I may, your worship, that's correct. And then we would reflect it in our work plan and in the budget until we know that it's not going ahead, essentially. So there are going to be other opportunities for council to determine, whether to accept the grant. We always have to do an agreement, which we take back to council before we accept the money. And then in the interim, staff would plan out what that capital project looks like, what the plan for the 5 years looks like, integrating, the projects that are in the stormwater management plan and having to either push other ones out beyond that 5 years. So in the report, I think it does speak to that this would sort of take the place of other planned projects potentially, because we are not looking at this point adding staff to the complement.
Councillor Patterson, then I'm going to just throw in one more comment after that. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Worship, and through you to either our CAO or our Director of Finance. In regards to the next budget and the work plans for the stormwater management, do we have specific plans in gear already budgeted for in the 2022-2023 budget per se that accounts for part of that, like 383,307? Thank you.
I'm assuming that's going to either the CAO or the Director of Finance.
I can address that briefly. In the amended financial plan that we looked at last with council, there weren't specifically amounts in the plan yet related to the stormwater management plan in the community park. Of course, there's other storm drainage projects throughout the city, but nothing specifically in the community park. This would be all new expenditures.
Okay. I thought I saw Councillor Chandler's hand up, but I apologize. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Your Worship. And a question either through Jetta or Kiva here. Regarding the 5-year, has the 5-year plan, taking a 20-year and condensing it into a 5-year plan is making us a little nervous. I can feel the temperature right now. And maybe for good reason. Does this grant opportunity, does it actually suggest that it has to be done in 5 years, that we have to break it down? Or is it something that we could prorate it into more like into our 20-year plan? Because all that we're doing is we're just spreading out the pain, for 20 years, amortizing it for a longer period to get those payments down. Is that possible? Or do they have if you go for a 5-year grant and we're successful, do they say, and it's going to have to be completed by 2027? Is that come with a ruling that we have to follow through? I'm just not sure about that 5-year plan.
I'm assuming that the question is the grant fixed on 5 years rather than on more than, can we spread it out longer?
Yeah. Through your worship, I can answer that. It is, it does have a 5-year deadline, and I believe it's December 31st, 2026. All works must be complete.
Yeah, I was just going to say my mathematical abilities are not all that strong, but 5 years don't add up to 2026 from 2023. So we only got a 3-year time frame to do this in. Is that what I'm hearing?
It's 5-year worship.
It is 5 years. It doesn't have a cap on the year.
It does, and I'd have to go back and look at the original information I printed off. I'm not sure if Jetta or Kiva has it handy, but it's available online.
Okay. Keith.
Thank you. If I may, Your Worship, one thing that just came to my mind while we're talking here, and just to pick up on what Councillor O'Brien said, the timeline is tight, but in terms of discussion for today, if staff could reduce the scopes, obviously we're trying to get the biggest bang for the buck by including everything and getting 5 million covered out of a 7 million project. But would there be an appetite for council if we were to go back and sort of look at a reduced scope? Because they don't say that we have to do everything we planned on doing in 20 years, in 5 years. They just say whatever you apply for has to be done in 5 years. So there might be an opportunity for staff to look at a smaller bundle of projects, I guess, rather than going for the whole thing. I don't believe there's anything that says we have to do everything. Is that correct, Director Bovin? We could look at a smaller pile of projects, I guess.
Through you, Your Worship, that's correct.
Hark, am I hearing the fact that maybe a deferral might be in order until we get all that information together and we can relook at it at the next meeting?
If I may, Your Worship, we may need to call for a special meeting on it just because the deadline is before our next meeting. But if we could get a deferral just with no date specified, then staff can do some quick calculations over the next couple of days. And if we need to, we could ask for a special council just to get the resolution on this.
I'm not hung up on the dates of the meeting. If we want to do that, that's fine. The last question, if I could, just to throw in a couple quickies, is first off, it's 1.5% increase if you took it as a straight operational cost at $383,000 a year. It's not 15% or 13%, just so we know that that's not that massive of the increase. And if you lowered down some of your other capital spending, it would probably, you'd bring it back to where it was hardly a blip. But my question is we wouldn't probably show this into the budget until 2023 if I understand how we're doing this. My understanding is that we're not going to be ready to start to spend the money until 2023. So we would put it in the budget at that point in time, assuming it's within the 5-year time frame that would, so 2028 would be the minimum of the time frame. Quite frankly, if it's not 2028, we're kind of just whistling in the wind here as far as it goes with the dollars and cents. I happen to believe that if we can't put it all in and stretch it to 2028, we better just stay the way we are and just keep going on for 20 years and hope something comes in the future to be looked at. It's nice to get $5 million for a $2 million investment. I'm always in favor of that kind of a return, but sometimes it just makes sense that we wait. So that was a long drawn out statement that says I'd be interested in deferring this until we get a better understanding of what can and can't be done. So I need a motion to defer. Okay, go ahead. Quick question, and then we'll hold on your hand there.
Thank you, Your Worship. Is it possible that we could get an amount that we're going to spend yearly for the 20-year plan to compare?
We could have that they could bring that to us when the what's on the budget right now is to put in. I think that would be a reasonable request. Councillor Greer, you had your hand up.
Thank you. I could put a motion to defer it, but I just question your 1.5%. 383,000 represents over 2%. Does it not?
No, budget's 20 million a year. So you take 383 and divide it into 20 million. You know what? Quite honestly, we're halfway in between you and I on that number.
Yeah.
So
my concern
1.75.
Right. My concern is with this money, it's just added money. I mean, we're looking at a at a swimming pool, which is going to be 50 or 60 million dollars. And, you know, we just can't continue to spend these huge amounts of money. And especially if we're trying to keep the taxes down at the same time. And I would certainly, I'd make the motion to defer this if you want.
All right, I'm deferred and seconded by Councillor O'Brien. No discussion. I'll call a question. All those in favor of deferring? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. We're going to defer this. Thank you very much, Mr. Bowden. Ms. Weeks, you're up.
Thank you. So this report seeks council direction on the submission of resolutions for consideration at the 2022 AVICC convention. So the deadline for resolutions is noon on Friday, January 28th. Staff have provided an example as outlined in attachment 2, and there is a sample motion on page 2 of the report should council have any other resolutions they would like to submit. The recommendations per the council agenda.
Okay. I need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. So Councillor O'Brien, seconded by Councillor Greer. Discussion? Call the question. All those in favor? It's carried. Ms. Kaler.
Thank
Back to
you.
the kitchen.
This is a relatively straightforward report. I think it comes up quite often, and it's just to get council direction to commence the election process by appointing our in-house corporate officer and deputy corporate officer as the chief election officer and deputy chief election officer. I think the report's pretty straightforward. We tend to do it in-house. There's a lot of expertise on our staff, and we've never had any challenges doing it ourselves. And actually with COVID, it may be a challenging time to bring new people in or consultants who are working across multiple municipalities. Not knowing the costs, if they're going to change for folks, we are recommending that we continue with our normal process of doing it in-house. And recommendations are per the agenda.
Sorry, I'll start that all over again. Financial adoption, the 5-year financial plan amendment bylaw 2021 to 2025, number 1572.1, amendments to the financial plan. I need a mover and a seconder for those amendments. Councillor O'Brien, second by Councillor Greer. It's going to be read 3 times. Discussions, all those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. Motions from previous meetings. Councillor Wilson, you're up first. Oceanside Task Force on Homelessness.
Thank you, Your Worship. Would you like me to read this again? Thank you. The motion I made was that a member of Parksville Council be appointed to the Oceanside Task Force on Homelessness to provide the City of Parksville the opportunity for representation, participation, and dialogue along with the current 12+ Oceanside partners.
Turn my mic back on again. Seconded by Councillor Patterson. Discussion. Councillor Wilson and Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I'll just read this. It's easier to. A panel member suggested to me that a panel from the Oceanside Task Force suggested that a representative from Parksville should be present at the meetings, which include Qualicum Beach, the RDN, RCMP, and the Vancouver Island Regional Library, among other organizations, to be assured a say in decisions made by the partners that have impacted and continue to impact Parksville without city staff or college council knowledge. Our CAO expressed concerns that the recent fire at the Travelodge Motel caused unnecessary logistical delays that would have enabled staff who had not been informed of the location of the shelter to efficiently communicate with EMO. I learned about the agreement between the BC Housing and the BIB through the manager of the motel during a meeting with the Parksville Tourism Association before we even knew. I find it unacceptable that the city of Parksville has been kept in the dark about the decision to locate emergency shelters in Parksville that inevitably require staff coordination with emergency services such as the fire department, RCMP, ambulance, EMO, and city bylaw, while other Oceanside communities have been able to forego their responsibility to share in the provision of shelters in their communities. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Wilson. I understand that there was a member of the panel that is on the Oceanside Task Force on homelessness. But would this have to go to a vote per se with the rest of the panel? This motion says that we would appoint someone, but doesn't the Oceanside Task Force on Homelessness also have to appoint a person from the city or a liaison type position from council?
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Patterson. I believe that people are not necessarily asked to join there. They're just representatives from each community. And so I would doubt very much that that is the case. I don't know whether our CAO could address that issue, but I suspect that the person who did suggest this to me is pretty well versed in this. Thank you.
Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through to Councillor Wilson. So on this task force itself, Councillor Wilson, then are there representatives of, say, other municipal organizations such as the RDN and or town of Qualicum Beach?
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor O'Brien, yes, there are. And there is also MLA Walker is also in that on there as well.
Any further discussion? Regrettably, I don't think I can support this motion. We belonged to this organization once before, and we were treated like second-class citizens. And in fact, we were asked to leave the meetings for certain issues that were being discussed. If I thought that our membership would have one iota of effect on the way homelessness is being handled, I'd gladly support this. The reality is that our only say we have on this matter is in zoning, and these zoning requests are handled by BC Housing and the owners of the land, not by this particular group of the committee. Each and every time we've had an issue with the direction of housing, it has been because of the zoning and bad, or not even bad, total lack of communications with BC Housing, and even they and the minister have agreed that that's where the problems have always occurred. I do not believe for 1 second that our membership in this organization would have prevented any of the miscommunication issues we experience. How they operate their facilities are not our business as long as they meet all of the appropriate requirements and laws stipulated in the zoning. We have issues. We have enough issues to focus on, let alone getting involved in the day-to-day workings of the homelessness task force. I believe there are a number of organizations that are part of this group that do a great job in what they're doing. And there's nothing more that we could provide to them other than to be at the table. I just have not seen an upside of us being there or not being there. So I'm sorry, but I can't support this particular motion. Thank you. Councillor Greer, first time.
Thank you, Your Worship. I couldn't agree more. I believe it was Councillor Franz that was on the board initially and was not treated very well. And We went through a lot of meetings and rigmaroles, and at the end of the day, we didn't have any say at all. So I agree with what the mayor has said. Thanks.
Councillor Wilson and Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Your Worship. So just to address what you've just said, I think the purpose that I'm making this motion for is to have representation there, to bring back, to have an open line of communication with our councillors and staff, because that's been missing. So whether or not we have much say in what goes on with the homelessness is almost doesn't really matter in some ways. It matters that we are heard, that they can't make decisions or attempt to make decisions without our knowledge. And so it's really just to be at the table and be there as a liaison, as we are with other appointments that we have with other organizations.
Okay, thank you. Councillor O'Brien, I saw your hand up.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Gotcha.
And I support this initiative at this particular point because I believe that would be advantageous to have a representative of the city of Parksville there. I understand that there were situations in the past, and that's where I like to leave them. The past is in the past. I want to move forward here because this is an ongoing situation, and moving forward, I think it would be advantageous for us to have a person from City of Parksville there that could actually present the City of Parksville view of which may not be currently being represented at that table. And at that table, there are decisions being made, and maybe those decisions are being made in fact that there is not a City of Parksville representative there. So I would think it would be best for us to at least get in there to hold ground as the City of Parksville, probably the biggest player in this whole thing. So the thing is that I believe we need to be there. We need to hear what's being said, and we need to be able to have a representative there to respond to any questions of, such as zonings and that type of thing, and or to get that information back as required. So that's, I think we need to be there.
Councillor Chandler and Councillor Frass.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through to council, just a couple of comments. I do typically, looking at what had happened in the past, it was a real troubling time at that point, and if people were to treat a cashier at a grocery store the same way as they treated what would be considered a liaison from us, they wouldn't it wouldn't be put up with. And at the same token, though, I think that the stakeholders, a lot of them have changed there. I think it's important for us to be part of the whole situation. I mean, it's not going away. This is going to be an issue that's going to be coming at us for many years to come. And I think on behalf of what we're doing as this council and for future councils, depending on who's involved for the next term, I think it's important for this to be set up. I'm certainly wanting to make sure that we monitor how our liaison is treated once that person's appointed. But I think it's important for us to be there too. And I do agree, I don't think there'll be a lot of decision-making process going on because it's all done through BC Housing and the province. But at the same token, I think it would be good to support it. So I will be supporting this.
Thank you. Councillor Frass.
Thank you. Through the mayor to council. I can appreciate that the request here is coming in to improve some of the communication and to be more involved in issues that are very important in our community. I think it definitely affects the council here and the residents and everyone at the task force there. They're made up of a bunch of different organizations who try to collaborate in ways to figure out how they can best do their work. My opinion on this is that unless we're being asked to provide input, though, it's not our position to go in and start dictating of how things should be done. And it's, when I sat on there before, I definitely, it was made very clear that they're not looking for our opinion on it, that they're not looking for a different perspective or, for us to be there. So if the aim is to improve communication with BC Housing, I think we should be talking to BC Housing and reinforcing that line of communication, reiterating to them how important it is, because they have dropped the ball many, many times, not included us. We only found out about things that were happening in our community through news releases that were going on, which is not the way to communicate with BC Housing. I don't think a liaison position there is really going to help bridge any and repair any relationships that go on there either. So for me, if they were asking for us to have a seat at the table, then I think that's a time that we would bring forward a liaison. If it not just from an individual there, but from the task force themselves, it should be their choice. Otherwise, you could be saying that, hey, here we are, we're coming in and putting a seat in there, and it might make them very uncomfortable, and we're just starting the relationship off from a bad footing again. So if the aim is to improve that relationship there, I think it should go there as a request from them, and then we can respond to that. But I don't think this is the way we should go about putting a liaison back in that role, considering the past that's happened.
Thank you. It's like you were reading my mind, because just prior to your start, I was jotting notes down here. And I think what we're doing is we're approaching this in the wrong fashion, and very much along the lines of what Councillor Fraz has indicated. First off, we shouldn't be looking as a representative to participate in dialogue with these individuals. What we should be doing is asking, or for them to ask us to appoint a liaison back to their committee. And once that liaison is appointed, we're there to observe and to carry on back and forth. The way this is written, it says that we're going to participate in dialogue with the particular individuals. So we're just going about it in the wrong way. I think they need to be sending something to the city of Parksville, asking us to appoint a liaison to this particular one, not just some member going off and saying, oh, I think we should have you all at the table. That's not the way it's supposed to work. So in my mind, let them come to us and request us to appoint a liaison. Then we can sit down and have that conversation if need be. I would support a liaison position, but not somebody that's going to sit at the table and get into these discussions. I go back to my earlier comment. Our discussions are with BC Housing, and only with BC Housing, not with the task force. It's nice, and they do great work. There's a lot of these groups that do amazing work, but when you get right down to it, it has nothing to do with the city of Parksville at that point. We need to be dealing with where it's going to go, whatever they're going to be building, how it's going to be built, and what the zonings are of that particular property. That's what we need to be involved with. The rest of it is something else totally. It's under different jurisdictions. It's under the province. It's under Island Health. It's umpteen different organizations. I just think that we need to look at this and change it around so that if they ask us to provide a liaison, then we can look at it and bring it forward again. Again, I'm still going to be voting against this at this rate. Any other discussions? Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to propose maybe an amendment to this proposed motion anyways, that instead of that a member of Parksville Council be appointed to, I would just like to do a friendly amendment, say that Councillor Wilson would be appointed to the Oceanside Task Force. That's the only change in the wording that I'd like to propose at this time.
We need a seconder for that. Councillor Wilson, are you seconding that? Okay, discussion? Go ahead, it's your
Right.
amendment.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, my reason for amending that to Councillor Wilson, because I just think that I think fresh face is what's needed at this, and a fresh perspective, and maybe maybe it will be ineffective, but the thing is that we don't know if we don't try. If some of the players have changed, and if some of the attitudes have changed, then that's maybe great. But I think that Councillor Wilson could maybe bring a certain amount of clarity to the situation from council's perspective that maybe needs to be represented at that table. So that's my reason for that. Thanks.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Wilson. just to clarify, you were asked to sit on the panel. Is there liaison positions in regard already on the panel, or does everyone have a vote? Or I'm not sure of the terms of reference in regards to this task force.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Patterson. That I was just thinking that myself. I believe that one of the councillors from Qualicum Beach is on there, but I could be wrong. I'm pretty sure, though, there is a Qualicum representative, and it could be Scott Harrison, but I'm not absolutely sure about that. My understanding it is a liaison position, and perhaps Councillor Fraz might be able to answer. I mean, before it was a liaison position. I'm not sure whether they vote or whether this is just a group of a group of organizations that get together and discuss oceanside task force homelessness issues. So I really can't answer that definitively for you.
Councillor Fraz. You had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. It's not so much in response to that, as you know, things could change over the time, but my comment is just going to be that I'd be supportive of this amendment of having Councillor Wilson on there. Again, though, if the request came from the task force, I think that's the appropriate way to do it, is to have them let us know that a council representative would be welcomed and requested there. Otherwise, you know, we're taking the liberty of just assuming there, and I don't think that's the way to go about starting that relationship, especially considering that there is some repair needing to be done in that point. So, you know, maybe this needs to be deferred to a point where they can have a conversation, their task force, and see if they'd be welcoming to having Parksville there, because I was in the impression they were quite glad to have the city of Parksville not at their table anymore. On top of which, that was for the few times they even allow the liaison to be in the room there. There was a few times where they kicked me out, regardless, you know, of not having a vote to there, just to not be part of the conversation. So I think that it needs to come from more just one individual, but from the entire task force should have a say in that.
Thank you. Problem I have with the amendment that I want to talk about right now is that by identifying a specific member of council as the appointee or the liaison, well, it wouldn't be a liaison because they haven't asked for one, but to be on the particular Oceanside Task Force, is that I'm having a hard time here. What happens at the end of October if, God forbid, and don't mean this to sound derogatory, but if Councillor Wilson doesn't get elected, then her position on that task force is null and void, and we don't have anybody any further. If we're going to do this, you have to do this as a liaison position that will be, the mayor will then appoint different liaisons going forward to identify a specific person. If we were at the beginning of our term and you had 3 or 4 years to play with it, then that's a little bit different scenario. But by appointing somebody that potentially could only be here for another 9 months, that becomes, or 10 months, that becomes a bit of a different kettle of fish. I still believe that it should be a liaison position if and when they ask us to be one. But that's my concern with it. As far as appointing Councillor Wilson as being the liaison, that would probably have been my first choice anyway. So that who it is not relevant. It's how it's being done is relevant. Councillor Chandler.
Thank you, Worship. Through to council, with the conversation that has gone around the table, it's very informative. I do tend to agree with Councillor Fraz. And at this point, the only way I would support this motion now would be if we could have the Oceanside Homelessness Task Force contact us and ask us by way of a letter. I think the process that we're going through here right now is it's not really the appropriate process, and it may be okay for 2 or 3 people on that panel that are on there, but it may not be for others. So I think it needs to be a decision from their end, and they invite us properly and we do the proper process. So at this point, I would basically no longer support the original amendment or the adjusted amendment.
Councillor Wilson and Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Your Worship. So listening to this discussion, it might not be a bad idea to ask them. I'm just wondering whether I could amend.
Push the button.
Yeah, the button's on, sorry. To read that, that we send a letter to the task force suggesting that we would like to have a liaison to that position, or a voice at the table, whatever, however our CAO would word that, and ask them for a response.
Well, the letter should come from them to us is the proper way to do that. If they want us on the homelessness task force, then they are the ones that should be inviting us to sit at the table with them. It would be my thought.
Just in response to that, Your Worship, they may never ask us. And so they may not even know about us asking. So my point is that they can say no. They can say, no, we don't want you there. And that will certainly give us a great indication of how they feel. But to put a request out, I don't think is out of order right now to tell them that we would like to be there. And they can, how they respond is what's going to be. Then we can take it from there.
Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess the question is we're asking here for them to ask us to be send a liaison. But didn't they already do that originally when Councillor Fraz was appointed as a liaison? Didn't they already ask for a representative from City of Parksville? And which Councillor Fraz was appointed to. So when Councillor Fraz left, was that on their doing, they eliminated Councillor Fraz, or did they eliminate have they since rescinded the liaison position from the City of Parksville? If it's just a question of them, and I agree, Councillor Fraz had certainly no reason to stay at the meeting, but did they rescind that liaison position? Maybe that liaison position is still there, it just remains unfilled. So the question is, I would suggest maybe it would be advantageous to us, maybe our CAO can send a letter to them to ask if the City of Parksville liaison position is still available at the Oceanside Task Force.
Any discussion? All right, we're still, sorry, we're still on the amendment anyway, so we've kind of slid off. I apologize for letting that happen. Let's take a vote on the amendment to change it from member to Councillor Wilson. So that's been seconded. Just I'll call a vote. All those in favor of the amendment? Opposed? So, yeah, it does. Go ahead, Councillor Fraz.
I just wanted to say, it seems like we've gone now from our original point to, I'm not really quite sure where we're at now with things.
Well,
so.
we're on the amendment.
No,
Okay, the amendment said, and the only change to the amendment was that instead it was that Councillor Wilson be appointed for the council. I'm taking it to the Oceanside Task Force on homelessness. Okay, so now we've kind of gone past that, and that's where we're at. If I didn't make myself clear.
No, I realized that. I just went through the discussion just as far as what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, right now we're working on the amendment. So if you're in favor of Councillor Wilson being the member or the being changed here, that's where we're going to go. So we've voted on it. That's the amendment. It's been amended. So now we're going to vote on the amended motion. Councillor Greer,
Your worship, was that passed?
just the amendment was passed.
I thought we had 4. I don't know, but, did Mark vote against that?
Yeah, Mark voted in favor.
No in favor. Okay, thanks.
So it carried. The amendment carried. So now we're talking about the amended motion. All right, and that's where we're at. Any further discussion on the motion as it was amended? Okay. That amendment.
Since I made it, so basically I amended the motion to suggest just changing the first 3 words and just saying that,
Yes.
that Councillor Wilson be appointed, da, 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 da. So isn't that not what, that was the amended motion, so we don't go back to the original motion now?
Oh, yeah, no, we just voted on the amendment.
Oh, okay, just the
So
amendment,
now we're
yeah.
voting on the amended motion, okay? I'll ask Ms. Weeks to go to read us the motion in total, if that's what you wish.
So the main motion as amended will read that Councillor Wilson be appointed to the Oceanside Task Force on Homelessness to provide the city of Parksville the opportunity for representation, participation, and dialogue along with the current 12+ Oceanside partners.
Okay, is everybody clear on what we're talking about now? All right, any further discussion before I call the vote? All right, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor of the motion? So I've got 1, 2, 3 in favor, opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4. Motion fails. Having said that, I think that we should encourage them to invite us. And I will look into your question, Councillor O'Brien, as well. Yeah, okay. I think it's up to them to ask, but I'll find out. I'll check with the CAO on Friday when she's back in the office. Okay, we'll go from there. All right, moving. Councillor Fraz.
Thank you. Provided a notice of motion to your CAO so that it can be discussed for this meeting. The motion is that council return to online format of meetings until the end of the pandemic.
I need a seconder for that motion. You're going to second it? Okay. Councillor Wilson is seconding. Discussion. Go ahead, Councillor Fraz. It's yours.
I'll open up to the floor. I'll speak after.
Pardon me.
I'll allow others to speak first there. That's fine. Never mind.
Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would find it difficult to support this motion. If councilors want to Zoom meetings, that is their prerogative. I'm sure there's no problem in that. However, as councilors, we are expected to be the leaders of the community. And I think we must show some leadership by attending our meetings here in the quorum. We're certainly safe enough, being so far apart with petitions and so on. I don't see a problem that way at all. I think we should be back and invite the public back as well, because I think it's important to show leadership in this. The pandemic, we've gone 2 years now, and we're heading into a 3rd year. And I think the new variant has, although it's been affecting a lot of people, it's not very serious. And I think we're looking at the end of this coming, and I see no reason to be back in the forum. Thanks.
Thank you. Before we go any further, if the CAO would like to put forward the information that she received on Friday.
Thank you, Your Worship. So on Friday, there was a generic email sent to all CAOs from the Assistant Deputy Minister of Municipal Affairs. And it didn't seem to reflect exactly the order that I was able to read. But it did suggest that if council is moving fully back to virtual meetings, that there might be some expectation that a place or space be created for members of the public that do not have access to virtual online meeting technology of their own. So depending on the vote of council today, we will have to look into that further and get some clarification from most likely MIA-BC as to what that means. And so if council does decide to go to a fully virtual space, we may need to provide a space for folks who can't access the meeting through other means. So that's something that staff would look into depending on the vote of council today.
I just wanted everybody to be aware of that before we went much further with the conversation. Councillor Chandler, you're up.
Thank you, Worship. I would normally I would support this. In this situation, the only reason why I wouldn't is because we do have that option to be flexible and be able to come or go to the meetings, and whether we want to be virtual or not, as we are today. I think, comment from Councillor Greer, I just want to point out that I think the one person that's definitely a person that wants to get engagement with people and so on is Councillor Fraz. So that I see the motive behind it is really more of just a safety motive and that type of thing. So I agree with both sides, but I'd certainly, at this point, I don't want to support it. I'd still want to be in the forum until something became much more serious. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Brien, then Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Your Wilson. Your Worship.
Your Wilson.
Your Wilson. Thank you, Your Worship. What I'd like to say is I would not support this either. We have met in the forum here. We've shown leadership. As Councillor Greer has said, we've shown leadership into doing all the right precautions. The staff has done everything possible to do. Recognizing that we've done this, we've done it safely and without any repercussions or infections, so to speak. So I think we've done a very good job of doing this, and I believe that the personal is a much favored action in this. But as Councillor Chandler has pointed out, any council member or member of the public that is not comfortable always has the option of zooming in on our meetings. As long as we have that in our back pocket to offer to anybody that is not comfortable, then I believe that offers full inclusion for everybody to participate. I note that the legislature, the BC Ledge, they're attending in person now, and so forth, and with similar protocols in place. So I certainly would not go to that. And the reality is, folks, is if you're aware of what's happened this last weekend, the numbers are dropping already on the latest, the Omicron. And so the thing is that whether it was an overreaction right from the last 2 months ago will remain to be seen if the hospitalizations overwhelm our health care system. But as it is right now, it seems to be on the way out. In fact, some suggestion was made at the news level that the pandemic may be becoming an endemic very soon. So I think that we're out of the woods. So at this particular time, I would certainly be in favor of those who wish to attend in the forum in person shall continue.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Perhaps this question should go to our CAO, through you to our CAO, and that's with regards to, are all staff able to do virtual meetings, including Amanda, who is always in these meetings? And then I have another question to follow.
If I may, Your Worship, all staff, pretty much with the exception of myself and Amanda, do tend to come in virtually or just come in for a moment and then leave. We probably could figure out some way that Amanda would not have to be there, and unless something went wrong with the technology. But at this point, we have been minimizing the number. If you recall, before the pandemic, senior staff used to attend in person, and that's not our practice right now.
Thank you. And through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Fraz, I'm just curious as to why you have brought this motion forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Through the mayor to council and to address the question there. Thanks. That's a good question. This motion put forward, it was in response to the city mandating for the employees to have mandatory vaccinations was announced a couple weeks ago. And I thought then it would be prudent to take some cornerstone measures that we had throughout the pandemic. This is when we first started. We had gone to online to Zoom. It's an effective way to limit completely from any kind of chance of things happening rather than depending on vaccines, which have only been mediocre and in fact showing, still a lot of transmissions out of it as well. I thought the timing of it was kind of interesting considering that if this is kind of, this wave kind of coming to a crest and passing now and or being out of the woods, so to speak, that to be an interesting time to bring out a mandate like that. But regardless though, I think, as I mentioned, we have the kind of option to go hybrid as we see happening now, but I think hybrid is the least desirable of all the options of being in person or being exclusively on Zoom. It puts you in a position where if you're the person who is not going to be present, you're very disconnected from the rest of the conversation. You don't get the same visual contact that we get now. You get a spectator kind of view looking down onto the rest of council. And I don't think anyone really appreciates being in that position. I know when I've been into it before, you don't have the same ability to interact with the meeting. When you can't see anybody. At the RDN, the way that they have it operating now, the chair is present at the forum and allows for residents to come and sit in and view. But everyone, regardless if they're in person or at home, are still required to have their electronic devices there and be present on Zoom. So that, like in this case, Councillor Chandler would still be able to see all our faces and we'd still be able to see them too. So it puts everyone on the equal playing field. Whereas this, I think, kind of sets up two tiers. And like I say, I think hybrid is just the least desirable, but it's good that we have it as an option. So that kind of thing considered, I realize we're able to meet in person, but given that, pandemics are uncomfortable, no one appreciates where everything's at and we don't have any idea of how things go on. We never anticipated to be 5 waves into it. Is it going to go 6, 7? I mean, to assume that it's going to be ending now is, I don't think anyone can make that kind of assumption and out of it or should. So, I think we need to take the pragmatic approach to it and return to that exclusive kind of approach, being online, and then adjust from there as things really do show signs of improvement. If we're not at a point right now where we wouldn't go exclusively online to Zoom, what would the situation need to be to dictate that point? Like how bad could it need to get before you would say, okay, now we need to go back to Zoom? Because I think we've really been kind of like the boiling frog type thing where the temperature is constantly going up and we'd be more accustomed and climatized to, our comfort levels adjusted, but we're no better off now than we were in the first wave. So, how do we really get a perspective of how deep we are in this pandemic and when it's really going to be out of it? We need to really, I think, set those boundaries. And if we're in the middle of a wave of a pandemic, then we should be on Zoom. If we're not in a wave of pandemic, then we should not be on Zoom. Then we can be in person. But if we're going to be asking people, we've got to mask up again, well, then we should be back online. Like we should be adjusting as things go too, and not just kind of holding our one position and calling it leadership because, we're saying we're comfortable enough to do this. It's not a comfort level for me or a lack of comfort. I'm fine with that. I like our spacing, this type of thing too, but we're going to be asking staff now to, you have to have a vaccine mandate and all these measures getting down on them. I think we should be responding to where things are at as well in the pandemic. And to me, that means that we can go on to Zoom. So fine either way with how council wants to go with this, but I thought it definitely warranted the discussion.
Any further discussion? Okay. I will not be supporting this particular motion only because at this point in time, I do believe that by giving everybody around this table an opportunity to either be on Zoom or be here in person, it gives us that flexibility to work. I think when we first went on and we went totally to Zoom and had our meetings, then things were significantly different in my mind. People were dying. ICU was filling up. The hospitals were in overflow. We were much worse off at that point in time than we are now. We've had the vaccinations come in, and that has cut down the requirements significantly. The whole thing is working towards an end. And as Councillor O'Brien mentioned, you know, the numbers are getting better, and they're going to continue to get better from all accounts. And I think now is the time we just keep going the way we are. And if one of us doesn't feel like they're comfortable with being at this meeting, there's no shame in going on Zoom and participating in that manner. Same thing with the staff. The staff are all more than capable of coming to the meetings via Zoom rather than in person. I just don't see where there's an upside to doing this at this time. We're trying to open it up for the public. We're trying to be part of a better way of communicating. This is important. Going backwards doesn't solve the problem. So I will not be supporting this motion. Thank you. Any further conversation? Then I'm going to call the vote. Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Your Worship.
At the last minute.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to
Yeah,
say
that's fine.
through you to Councillor Frowsley, I hear his points and I understand, but for me, I'm comfortable being on Zoom. I agree, I don't like it at all because it's hard to get the mayor to acknowledge me when I'm up there on that screen, but I have to yell and make all sorts of waving motions to him. But all that aside, and tongue in cheek, I still feel that we do have the option. And I think if I don't necessarily agree with everyone's assessment here that the pandemic is under control and going down. I happen to have two very good friends who are nurses who work in the hospital at the front lines. So I have a different perspective. And, but I also do feel that we can, if things get worse, if we feel that it's not safe to be here, most of us won't be here. I think that'll just be an automatic. So I take a wait and see approach. I won't support your motion, not because it's not necessarily not a good motion, but I think right now I'm willing to go along with the way things are and allow us the option to attend, and staff in particular not to attend. Thank you.
Fair enough. Thank you. I will call the question then. All those in favor of the motion? All those opposed? The motion fails. Thank you. You want to recount? It was that close, right? Okay, we had one more notice of motion through Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. This notice of motion is to do with permissive taxes. And I give you a little bit of background to what has happened in the past. Approximately 10 years ago, and I can be corrected on that, when Chris Berger was mayor, he decided to have an advisory committee, which I was against. But anyways, when it was approved, I decided that I should be the chairman. So I chaired the meeting. And one of the many things that we discussed was permissive taxes. And at that time, permissive taxes were getting out of hand and we had no boundaries. So we decided at that time to put a hard cap on 225,000. And over the time, for whatever reason, it's come down to, there's been a slight change where it became a hard cap of 225, and then also the fact that it was going to be worked on some kind of a percentage basis. So what we're trying to do today is to get it back to a hard cap of 225. Everyone has got the option one, option two, which is basically the same, except that one would be the council would have a vote tonight and decide, or put it on to a notice of motion. So if you want to do it tonight, I can read you the motion. that staff be directed to amend the permissive tax policy to eliminate the reference to the percentage of taxes collected for simplicity reasons and cease of understanding and retain the annual cap of 225,000 for all applicants. So I'll need a seconder for that.
Just Councillor O'Brien seconded it. Just a point of clarification, if I can. This was brought up, this was a notice of motion at the last meeting, if I'm not correct, if I am correct.
I wasn't here at the last meeting,
The
so
December, the meeting in December,
yeah, I missed that last
Because
meeting.
because it says when
I wasn't here the last meeting.
I'm not sure what it is, but I remember Councillor Greer making this motion or notice of motion at that time, because in what I've been given, it says here that we could vote on it on the January 17th meeting. So that's today. And
Yeah,
so that means the notice, CAO, help me. Was this not already brought up? We don't need to go through the voting in favor of having the vote, do we? That makes
Yes,
sense, but
if I may, Your Worship, I believe this was brought up in the amended budget discussion by Councillor Greer. So he provided notice that at a later date, he would bring that up for council's consideration.
so we don't need to have a vote on this. I just want to make sure I'm following the right process. As far as being able to debate this discussion.
well, if it was a note of motion that I brought up, and I don't recall that, but I could have, then we should be voting on it tonight.
That's exactly what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
that,
that's
so I've given you my motion.
Yeah.
And it's been seconded, I believe.
Yeah, so now, all right, as long as I'm clear as to where
Yeah.
you think we are,
That's good.
all right?
Yep.
So now we can have the discussion on your proposal. You have the floor.
Well, I don't have much to say. I think it was always recommended by everybody over the last three councils now that we have a hard cap at 225,000. Otherwise, it gets out of control. And I think a hard cap is the way to go, and that's the way it's been for the last 10 years. And it works very well.
Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to, or perhaps Councillor Greer can answer this. Just why 225? Is that the right amount anymore? Because it's been that way. Does that mean it's the right way to go forward? And I just wonder, does that amount work for us anymore? Thank you.
Well, I think at one time it was 250, if I'm not mistaken, and then there was more questions whether it should be a little higher, and it got out of hand, actually. So that's why Mayor Berger decided to have an advisory board put together and analyze it all. We spent several meetings going through all the information on it, and it was decided that 225 was in the best interest of the city.
May I have a follow-up, please?
Certainly.
Thank you, through Your Worship. And I guess my question is, perhaps Councillor Greer or someone can answer this, is to, when we had the percentage, was this amount not getting lower? Or was it, that was my understanding, that it was
I can't-
progressively getting lower, and perhaps our CAO
I
can
can't
address
answer
that.
She's just popped up, so I'm sure she has something to say.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, so there was a table in the policy, or there is a table in the policy where it was progressively to get lower each year. And so some years, depending on the number of applications and the actual tax burden that they were facing, we did actually have to reduce the permissive tax to less than 100%. So a couple of folks got, say, a 94 or 89% forgiveness. And so there was a target that over a 10-year period, it would gradually be reduced to the cap, which I believe was the 225. The other aspect was it was kind of either or. So it was either the percent also went down, I believe. I don't have the policy in front of me, but I think it went down to 1.67%. But that was a gradual reduction from what I can recall. So I believe when Councillor Greer and the previous council was talking about this, it was because of a growing number of applicants and an increasing amount each year, year over year. So that was my understanding of the objectives of the current policy.
Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Your Worship. And if further on that to the meeting, it was the budget meeting that we had, and the question we had discussion at that time was it was going to make it far simpler for the staff actually to calculate the amounts of the permissive tax exemptions, because when the percentages were there, as well as the annual cap type of thing, it threw all sorts of equations out there that would just confuse everybody. And I recall the conversation at that time, and I appreciated the fact that Councillor Greer did mention that if we just bring it to a flat 225, that it would make things far simpler and equitable for everyone. So that's why I'm very much in favor of this. I think it's a good move. Thank you.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I appreciate Councillor Greer bringing forward the permissive taxation policy. It's one that him and I actually agree on quite a bit, where the amounts are debatable, and some of the different organizations on whether or not a permissive taxation to the full amount is required or even necessary. I do have concerns with the cap of $225,000 because obviously things have changed in the 10-year period. I would, however, I would like a great deal more comments from finance, whether or not this is actually in the best interest, which we don't have at this point in time. We've had discussions in regards with budget meeting and everything. And I know that we've had different percentages of taxes collected, and I honestly feel that this whole policy needs to be reviewed, and doing it piece by piece isn't necessarily in the best aspect of everything. So at this point in time, I'm through the mayor to the director of finance, would like some, not necessarily clarification, but opinion from the best point of that being from finance.
I see the director of finance on the stage. Please go ahead.
Sure. Through the mayor to Councillor Patterson, we could prepare some analysis for you as to what amounts and percentages have been granted for permissive tax exemptions over time. And as you know, some are addressed annually, but we also have the Island Corridor Foundation, which receives a 10-year permissive tax exemption. So we need to look at that in total. It would be up to council whether you wanted to change that in light of the fiscal situation at each budget year, but I mean, that's at your discretion to revisit those, whether it's a percentage of total property taxes or whether it's a cap. Really is, you know, we could consider that and provide you with some analysis if you would like.
Okay. I've got Councillor Fraz, then Councillor Greer.
Thank you, and through the mayor to council. Considering those comments from Councillor Patterson and how Councillor Greer mentioned when this first came about, there was a committee formed that took a look at things and went over a few meetings and came up with these recommendations. Maybe it might be a good idea to form that committee again to reanalyze and take a look where things are at, because rather than going by it piece by piece and leaving some pieces out, maybe it needs to be looked at as a whole again in entirety, and then come to council with all the recommendations and analysis of it.
Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd hate to have that committee set up again. It wasn't a welcomed committee to start with. And some of the problems that we encountered just gave council more problems than enough. But getting back to the hard cap, I think it's in our best interest, or the city's best interest, to have a hard cap. Otherwise, it can get out of control. Everybody wants somebody else to pay their taxes, but it's important for us to keep that amount as low as possible. And I don't think you can go any lower than 225. But we certainly don't want to go higher. But I don't think having another advisory committee would be the way to go. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Your Worship. So, yeah, Councillor Patterson has brought up a good point, and it's something I've always been concerned about with permissive taxes. Perhaps this is to our CAO that I could go through you to ask a question, Your Worship. How will it work then if we have a cap of 225? We're still going to be, some people will not get the full amount, or how will we divvy that up then? Will it not be basically the same idea? Not to say that the cap isn't a good idea. I'm just wondering whether the amount of the cap is right, or you know, the people who, the whole process basically. So can you perhaps guide me on that, Kiva? Thank you.
Thank you. If I may, Your Worship, through you to council. So I won't speak to the cap because that is a political decision on what that right amount might be. But essentially what happens is if we have 10 applications and they are all eligible for the 100% consideration, what we do is if they exceed the cap, say they're 300,000 total, then we basically equally reduce the amount of their exemption. So they all pay an equal percent essentially. So I'm not great at the finance off the top of my head, but so say we had $50,000 over, then we would essentially spread that shortfall, and each person who gets a permissive tax exemption gets the equal amount less, I guess. So like I mentioned, we've had some years where somebody, like all of the applicants who are eligible for 100% would get 96% or 89%. And we've had other years where everybody got the 100%, even though those caps were in place. So I think perhaps to build on what Councillor Patterson was saying, if we could provide council with maybe the history over the years since the policy was brought in, we could identify then which years we were cutting people's permissive taxes from the 100%. And that might help, you know, you would know exactly how much we pay every year in permissive tax exemptions or how much you grant, and then what percentages that reflects. So that might be a table that's just kind of speaks volumes to you in terms of the amounts. And we could certainly provide that to council very soon, I would say.
Thank you. Just going to make a couple comments here myself. First off, $225,000 was set 10 years ago. If you take the net present value of that, you're talking about $100 and some odd $1,000. I mean, it's in today's dollars, it's significantly worth less than what it was 10 years ago when it was put in by Mayor Berger and his committee. So that's why the percentage made sense, because the percentage brought it back into reality. If you didn't need it all, fine, that's it. It was $225,000, or I believe it was 1.67%, whichever was greater. So, you know, some years, if a lot of people applied, you might be at 1.67% of your budget as going to this. And in other years, the 225 was enough. So there is a cap to speak of. The cap is that it'll never exceed 1.67% of your budget, or $225,000, whichever is greater. So in my mind, why is it that we're worried about it? This is actually, right now, $225,000 is worth significantly less. My guess is, and I'm trying to remember, because 10 years ago, just before this, when I was the mayor, we were talking about a $10 or $11 million budget. We're now talking about a $20 million budget. So it's almost twice as much, if not twice as much of what we're dealing. And us giving permissive taxation exemptions it's part of the price that we pay for doing business with these organizations. These organizations bring good to our community. They bring a benefit to our community. So there should be an upside for them by being allowed an exemption on their taxes in certain places, the SOSs of the world, the Legions, all the different organizations around that take advantage of this. It is important that we continue to do that. And as our taxes go up, that whole effect changes dramatically to them. So for us, leaving it at $225,000 or 1.67% of the budget, whichever is greater, that to me covers everybody on this. I don't see why now we want to start to look at capping it at 225, because right now I think it is just about 225,000 would just about be approximately 1.67. If finance, if Jetta is there, she could tell me that by dividing it for me, since I don't have a calculator. But we're pretty close to that 1.67% as it is now. Am I close on that? $225,000 would be pretty close to 1.67% of our budget.
I think it is really close. Yeah, I'm just taking a look at that.
So we've just hit the break even now. So as the tax goes up, the total taxes, which we know are going to go up, then we should have a little bit more to be able to give, because there's going to be more organizations that are going to be coming to the benefit of our community. The CAO wishes to speak. She had her hand waving there ferociously. Go ahead.
Thank you. If I may, Your Worship, just to remind Council that there's an additional challenge, I suppose, that the organizations have cited, in that if the city does not grant 100% tax exemption, it also then makes the group eligible for other taxes from other governments. So if we do grant them the 100%, it automatically exempts them from those taxes too. So in the past, when we've had the lower amounts, we have received concerns from some of the groups that not only do they get the lesser amount from the city, it opens up that they have to pay RDN, like school and hospital and other government taxes too. So it's sort of an additional burden on them when that happens. Just to remind Council of that.
Thank you. Councillor Greer, I seen your hand was up.
Thank you, Your Worship. The idea of having a cap was the fact, and I know the dollars are different today than they were 10 or 15 years ago, but the whole concept of this was not to spend taxpayers' dollars to let all of these groups have a free ride. I mean, it was understood that we were trying to cut them back because they were getting more at one time, and the idea was to cut them back. Otherwise, you're giving away money to organizations that maybe should be paying tax. So that's why there was always a cap. And I still believe the cap is the easiest way to benefit the city. And the organizations have to look after themselves, basically. But I think the cap is important, that we don't have permissive taxes going crazy and us giving away a lot more money than we should. Money is important to keep in our budget, not somebody else's.
I don't see us giving away money to organizations. The job of the committee, when they look at the permissive taxation exemption, is to evaluate whether that particular organization is valid to receive that exemption. And if they aren't, then you cut them off and you say, no, I'm sorry, you don't get the money. But on the other side of it, if they are, they rely on that. They need that money to operate. That is part of their budgeting, is by not having to pay the taxes. I don't see why we think we should be paying, they should be paying taxes just because everybody pays taxes. Well, these are organizations that do good, that we want to be part of our community with. And part of that cost to having them here is by providing them with tax exemptions so that they will stay with us. And if we don't think that they deserve it, then let's cut them off so that they're not paying for it. we're not paying it at all. I mean, then they can go back to their full taxes. So I think the question is we just have to have the managerial courage to say, sorry, organization X, Y, and Z, you're just not doing it for the community. Therefore, you're going to have to either pay your taxes or, well, you're just going to have to pay your taxes. That's the way I see it. Councillor Greer.
So your feeling, Mr. Mayor, is that if we have 100 people wanting 100% taxes and we end up giving away 300,000, that would be okay?
No, that's not what the discussion is. The discussion is $225,000 or 1.67% of the budget.
Well,
And that, by the way, 1.67% of the budget is about $225,000 right now. So,
yeah, so I don't see your point in going back to a percentage.
well, because as the budget goes up, as our budgets go up, and it will, I mean, we see the amount of development going on in our community. All of those places will be paying us taxes over the next 5 years or whatever, then our tax base will go up. And if people come to apply, then it increases by that 1.67%.
So what you're saying is it's possible then to go over the 225.
It certainly is, but we're also collecting a lot more money
Yeah.
from taxes.
But that was the reason this permissive taxes was put in the first place. So that we wouldn't it wouldn't go out of sight on us, because we don't want to maybe give away 500,000 or 300,000. So in order to prevent that, it doesn't matter how much money that the town takes in, it's a matter of how much that we want to give away. And I realize that all of these organizations are worthy of getting some permissive taxes, but you have to have a cap or else it just gets out of control. And that's what's happened in the past.
What happened in the past was the fact that you didn't have a ceiling on it and you didn't have a percentage on it.
Yeah,
In those days back,
we always had a ceiling on it. We always had a ceiling, even going back before, even when you were mayor, I'm sure we had a tax exemption that was over 250.
I don't recall that being the case, but regardless, it was set at $225,000 or 1.67%. Right now, we're at 1.67%. Next year, we will never be at $500,000. We would have to have a budget of $40 million plus in order to be at $500,000 for tax exemptions. So anyways, we're going around in circles. Sorry, folks. You're sitting here listening to us argue this, but Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll just throw it from a different angle here. I understand the reasoning because I remember those initial committee meetings and so forth, that the reasoning was that they put a cap on it of 225 or 250, I think it was at that time. But anyways, regardless, the reason is that it was to prevent the city of Parksville from being the land of permissive tax exemptions. When any basic nonprofits would they look at the different municipalities to locate in, and many of them can locate in whatever, and they would come to the city of Parksville. And if it would continue to grow, in fact, we have some permissive tax exemption individuals or organizations that receive it on 1, 2, 3 properties. And so that's what it was designed to prevent that from them stacking up or from just turning into it. It is very worthwhile that we do the permissive tax exemptions for the organizations, don't get me wrong. But the thing is that when we put the cap on it, what it does is that every one of them, once that cap is received, would receive the same percentage of decrease that would be to fall within that 225. And so what that does is it just means that there's not so many other properties that are not paying tax. They're paying less tax than they would. But the thing is that it's at a cap of 225. Otherwise, what's to stop if a organization qualifies for the same reason another organization qualifies, and you get a permissive tax exemption in Qualicum and you don't get it in Parksville, then they were going to go to Qualicum. And so that's, I believe the understanding was to put a lid on it so that we have to have, because it means it only mean that those organizations pay less taxes. It means every other individual business or property owner pays more taxes. So we always have to remember that, because that the shortfall for the budget has to be made up somewhere. So that's why the cap, that's why I'm still in support of Councillor Greer's recommendation.
All right, we beat this one to death. I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion? 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, all those against? So we can note who's for and who's against. Thank you. All right. So we have a cap of $225,000. Any other notices of motion? So, all right, no new business, and I'm going to bring this up because I'd like a request the support of the majority of council to propose a motion without notice regarding 2 council meeting changes. So I'm going to need your help, and I'll tell you what they are, and then you can decide if you want to go forward. Yes.
Excuse me, Your Worship, are you going to do new business
Yes,
after?
I'm doing it now.
Oh, okay, thank
Okay.
you.
Is that all right?
If you say so.
Did I miss something for you?
You said new business, but then you didn't look up.
Oh, sorry, because I was trying to figure out what my notes said. Here, sorry, my apologies. Look up. We're in new business, and what I'm saying is that I'm going to make a request from the majority of council to propose a motion without notice regarding 2 council meeting changes. That's what I need your help for. And I'll tell you what they are, and then you can decide whether you want to support it now or bring it up at a later date. I'm proposing that we schedule the Monday, April the 4th council meeting to Monday, April the 11th, as that date conflicts with the now very busy week with the AVICC conference and the LGA forum that we will be attending. So we're going to get back on Sunday. We're going to have a council meeting on Monday, and we're going to be gone again for the meeting. So that's the first one. And so the motion was that the April 4th to move to April the 11th. And I'm also suggesting, because we were looking at it, is that October the 17th is, I'm suggesting we cancel that meeting. And the reason I'm suggesting that is that the election is the 15th, which is Saturday. So there's not very much chance that you want to have a council meeting 2 days after the election. All of you will be hungover and won't be able to attend anyway. So, pardon me? October the 17th. Okay. No, we got to vote on now. I need a vote on whether we're willing to talk about this today or move it on to the next motion. So, all right, so let's vote on this first. Okay, all those in favor of having the discussion now? Opposed? You're opposed to it? You don't want to have it now?
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
In my opinion, unless we have something, a notice of motion that's time sensitive or required to be voted on immediately, then I don't think we should. So we have plenty of time to provide notice of motion and handle this next meeting. That's just my opinion. That's why I vote against it.
Well, then the motion is defeated because we can't go further without, I believe it takes a unanimous consent, if I'm not mistaken. So move on. All right, it'll go on as a notice of motion. Yep. Okay, our next regular council meeting will be on Monday, February 7th at 1 p.m. And now,
Your worship,
pardon me?
sorry, we're still in new business.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry. Did you have new business you wanted to bring forward?
I do.
All right, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Finally, I just want to mention that there is a memorial exhibit for local architect Manny Lafoy, who passed away a few years ago. And it's going to be held at the MAC from January 17th to February 28th. And it's a retrospective of his work, life's work.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? So, as I said, February 7th is the next meeting. I need a mover and a seconder for us to go into a closed meeting pursuant to section 91 E and K of the community charter, its disposition of land and negotiations of proposed provisions of municipal services. All in favor? Moved by Councillor, sorry, I'm jumping. Moved by Councillor O'Brien, second by Councillor Greer. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Let's give it 5 minutes.